Brothers and sisters in Islam, today I wanted to speak about love. A lot of times, when people want to refer to the concept of love, they will define it as an intense feeling. Even you, in your mind as you're going through the khutbah, how do you define love? A lot of people will describe it as an intense feeling of affection, deep affection. Some people will define it as تعلق القلب بالمحبوب بالكلية. When your heart is completely attached. When your heart is completely attached to that which you love. But there is a definition that I believe of love that is truly encapsulating. And that is تقديم محابه على محابك. When you sacrifice your love for someone else's or something else's love. And that is what I believe truly depicts what love is. When you sacrifice your love, your desire for someone or something else's love. Ibn al-Qayyim rahmatullahi alayh, he actually authored a book on love. And he speaks about all the things that a person will do for what they love. What they will do for love. And I paraphrase and I adapt slightly what he says. He says, because of love, a person will travel far distances. Lives have been taken. Battles have been fought. People have gone crazy. Money has been lost. Minds have become occupied. That's what love does. But at the very end, Ibn al-Qayyim rahmatullahi alayhi, he says, وَمَحَبَّةُ اللَّهِ لَا تُوصَفْ. But when it comes to the love of Allah Azza wa Jal, that is a love that you cannot describe. That is a type of love that you cannot put to words. Ibn Juzay rahmatullahi alayhi, he says, وَاعْلَمْ, know, وَاعْلَمْ أَنَّ مَحَبَّةَ اللَّهِ إِذَا تَمَكَّنَتْ مِنَ الْقَلْبِ ظَهَرَتْ آثَارُهَا. When the love of Allah Ta'ala has truly settled and established in the heart of an individual, ظَهَرَتْ آثَارُهَا, you will see the effects of it. Brothers and sisters in Islam, there was a woman from among the ashab of our Prophet ﷺ by the name of al-Gumaysa Bint Milhaan, also known as Sulaim. And wallahi, if you want to see the athar of love, the remnants and the effect that the love of Allah Ta'ala and the love of the Prophet ﷺ has on a person, how it manifests in action, how it manifests in one individual, study, don't just read, study the life of al-Gumaysa. Study the life of this woman, this great woman by the name of al-Gumaysa, Sulaim radiyallahu ta'ala anha. This woman was ajiba. She accepted Islam when Mus'ab radiyallahu anhu first came to al-Madinah and began propagating faith. She was from the very first individuals of al-Madinah to accept faith. She accepts Islam when there's only maybe a handful, maybe less than 10 individuals who accepted Islam at that point. Al-Gumaysa, the first thing she does, she begins to encourage her husband to accept Islam as well. Pushes her husband, tries to convince him, and he does not want to know any of it. He doesn't want to accept Islam whatsoever. In fact, he tries to convince her and pesters her over and over, come back to the religion of your forefathers. Come back, leave Islam, enter back into the fold of polytheism and idolatry. But wallahi, her love for Allah Azza wa Jal and the Prophet ﷺ was greater than even her husband. And realize the situation. She hasn't even met this man Muhammad yet. She has not even met this man Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam yet. But the love of Allah Ta'ala and the love of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam was something that settled in her heart. It penetrated in her heart. Her husband, by the name of Malik ibn Nadar. We spoke about his brother Anas ibn Nadar in another khutbah. This man, Malik ibn Nadar, died upon kufr, refused to accept Islam. When her husband died, a man by the name of Zayd ibn Sahl, also known as Abu Talha, he proposed. And he wanted to marry al-Gumaysa. And he says to her, Ya Sulaim, لَقَدْ جِئْتُكِ خَاطِبًا. I have come to you proposing. فَأَرْجُو أَلَّا أَرُدَّ خَائِبًا. I hope that you won't reject me. I hope that you won't leave me disappointed. The thing about this proposal, it wasn't just any proposal for her to consider. She actually wanted to marry this man, Abu Talha. Abu Talha, she heard good things about this man. This man was known, a person of dignity and honor. This man was also from her tribe, Banu Najjar. And therefore there was incentive for her to marry this man. But she says to him, Wallahi ma mithluka yuraddu ya Aba Talha. A person like you don't reject. Walakin, She says, وَلَكِنَّكَ رَجُلٌ كَافِرٌ وَأَنَا امْرَأَةٌ مُسْلِمَةٌ. But you are a man that is a kafir, a disbeliever, and I'm a woman that is a Muslim. Brothers and sisters in Islam, when the love of Allah Ta'ala and the love of the Prophet ﷺ truly settles in the heart, it becomes unshakable. It can be the best proposal in the world. It can be the best proposal in the world, but her love for Allah Azza wa Jalla and the Prophet is greater. And this is what it means to love Allah. This is what it means to love the Prophet ﷺ. Nothing gets between you and your love for Allah Azza wa Jal. Nothing gets between you and your love for the Prophet ﷺ. Not even a child, your own child. How loving that child is, how much you care for that child, how cute that child is, especially when they're younger, they're growing up. It doesn't come between you and Allah Azza wa Jal and His Prophet. Your spouse, a loving relationship that you have with her or you have with him, doesn't get between you and your love for Allah Azza wa Jal. No matter how loving that relationship is, not a proposal even, no matter how attractive the girl is, no matter how handsome the guy is, it doesn't get between you and Allah Azza wa Jal and the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. No sin even, no sin, no matter how tempting it is to look at, no matter how tempting it is to release your desires, how much you love it, if you could fall into it, does not come in between you and your love for Allah Azza wa Jal and the Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam. Sulaim radiallahu ta'ala anha, she ends up marrying Abu Talha, and they end up having a child as well. And there was a point where the child became sick. Sahl ibn Zayd or Abu Talha had to travel. And of course, like our kids get sick as well, the idea is that the child is going to recover, and so he leaves and he departs for his safar. And he's on his safar and the child actually dies. The child passes away. Now Sulaim radiallahu ta'ala anha, her husband comes back and has to tell her husband of the news that her son, that their son has just passed away. And subhanAllah, from her words, wallahi, sometimes not a big thing to see how much a person loves Allah Ta'ala and the Prophet. Just from the words and how she explains the loss of that child to her husband, you can tell how much she loves Allah and she loves the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. She says to him, Ya Aba Talha, Ya Aba Talha, أرأيت لو أن قوما استرجعوا عارية أعاروها للآخرين أفمن حقهم أن يخطوا عليهم وأن يمنعوها منهم؟ أو أبو طلحة, is it allowed for a person who has been given something to borrow to withhold that item when the owner asks for it back? A person gives you something, right? And now you have something that you want to borrow. Are you allowed to say, I don't want to give it back when the person starts asking for it? Of course, Abu Talha says, La, of course not. Look what she says. And wallahi, it shows you how much she loves to surrender to the will of Allah Ta'ala. She says, إِنَّ اللَّهَ اسْتَرَدَّ مِنْكَ مَا وَهَبْ فَاحْتَسِبْ وَلَدَكَ عِنْدَهُ. She says, Allah Ta'ala has reclaimed and demanded back that which He has given you. Consider your child to be with Allah Azza wa Jal. Brothers and sisters in Islam, just like the love of Sulaim for Allah Azza wa Jal was exemplary, and how she'd sacrifice and have no difficulty with that sacrifice for the sake of Allah Ta'ala, not reverting out of the faith that she has entered into, accepting a proposal, though she loves that proposal, but will only accept it if he becomes a Muslim, and how she's so willing to do taslim and surrender to the will of Allah Ta'ala, just like her love for Allah Ta'ala is present in her life. Wallahi, her love for the Prophet ﷺ is also well apparent. And wallahi, it is exemplary. And wallahi, it is unmatched. I want to take you back to what we're talking about. We're trying to exemplify and depict what true love is. And we mentioned what the definition is. The best definition, in my opinion, that depicts what love is. تَقْدِيمُ مَحَابِهِ عَلَى مَحَابِكَ. When you sacrifice your love for someone or something else's love. And wallahi, we see in the life of Sulaim. When the Prophet ﷺ, he first came to Medina, crowds and crowds of people. Crowds and crowds of people, they gather around the Prophet ﷺ. This is the man that we heard of, we never got to see. But this is the man, now he is approaching, now he is coming. And we know the poetry that they're singing, طَلَعَ الْبَدْرُ عَلَيْنَا. Everybody's excited, everybody is happy. Sulaim is of course one of them. She goes up to our Prophet ﷺ, and she says, Ya Rasulullah, O Prophet of Allah, لم يبق رجل ولا امرأة من الأنصار إلا وقد أتحفك بتحفة. Ya Rasulullah, saddened. He says, O Prophet of Allah Ta'ala, there is not a man or a woman from among the Ansar, from the people of Medina, except that they have given you a gift. She says, وَإِنِّي لَا أَجِدُ مَا أُتْحِفُكَ بِهِ. I don't find that which I can give you. She doesn't have anything to present to the Prophet ﷺ. She says, وَاللَّهِ لَا أَجِدُ مَا أُتْحِفُكَ بِهِ غَيْرَ إِبْنِي هَذَا. I don't have anything to give you, but Ya Rasulullah, take my child. Take my child, Ya Rasulullah. Take him as your servant, Ya Rasulullah. Who does this? Wallahi, who does this? To give your child up for the sake of the khidmah of our Prophet ﷺ. Wallahi, this is a type of love that we cannot comprehend. But this is what true love for the Prophet ﷺ manifests as. To give up your son. Take him, Ya Rasulullah. I have nothing, but I have this son. So take my son because this is what I have, Ya Rasulullah. Even in the small things in the life of Sulaim radiallahu ta'ala anha, and sometimes the smallest of things speak the loudest, you'll find how much she loved our Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. Anas radiallahu anhu, this is the son that she was presenting. Take my son Anas, when he grows up a little bit. And by the way, his father was who? Their first husband that died upon kufr. Malik ibn al-Nadar. Malik ibn Nadar. Anas radiallahu anhu, he grows up. And wallahi, you see this. You see the love that she has for the Prophet ﷺ in this most subtle thing. Anas grows up, and it was from her aada that she would braid his hair. His hair would be braided, from the top at least. And her husband, who was the first husband that died upon kufr, disliked this. And he kept pestering her, let's cut it off, cut off the hair. It's too long. And she would refuse. Why would she refuse? Simple thing, why would she refuse? No, I don't want to do it. Because the narrations mention that whenever Anas radiallahu anhu would greet the Prophet ﷺ, our Prophet ﷺ would pat him on the head. And then he would take this braid and stroke it and rub it, and Sulaim would see this, and because of that, she did not want to cut their hair. Because of the contentment that the Prophet ﷺ finds in that, and the contentment that she finds in herself, that the Prophet ﷺ is showing affection to my child, I don't want to cut it off. This is what you call love. This is what you all call love when it comes to the Prophet ﷺ, when it comes to Allah Azza wa Jal. There was an incident as well. Anas radiallahu anhu, he mentions that the Prophet ﷺ was in our residence, in our place of residence, and he fell asleep and it was hot. He began to sweat. He says, there's Sulaim carrying a container to be able to capture and collect the sweat of our Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam. Alayhi afdalu salati wa atammu taslim. There was an incident as well when her and Abu Talha radiyallahu anhum were traveling with our Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam outside of Medina. And they were on their way back to Al-Medina. Sulaim radiyallahu ta'ala anha at the time was pregnant. And just as they're about to enter into Medina, they're at the outskirts of Al-Medina. And Sulaim radiallahu ta'ala anha, she begins to feel the pain of birth contractions as she was going into labor. And the Prophet ﷺ wanted to enter into Al-Medina before nightfall. And so Abu Talha is forced to stay back with his wife, of course, Sulaim, as she is going into labor. And he does so, and the Prophet ﷺ trods along into Al-Medina. Subhanallah. Abu Talha radiallahu anhu, he raises his hands and he says, إِنَّكَ تَعْلَمُ يَا رَبِّي. Oh Allah Ta'ala, you know. إِنَّكَ تَعْلَمُ يَا رَبِّي أَنَّهُ يُعْجِبُنِي أَنْ أَخْرُجَ مَعَ رَسُولِكَ إِذَا خَرَجْ وَأَنْ أَدْخُلَ مَعَهُ إِذَا دَخَلْ. Oh Allah Ta'ala, you know that I love that whenever the Prophet ﷺ exits out of Al-Medina, I love to exit out with him. And whenever he enters into Medina, I love to enter with him. Wallahi, these are subtle things that we wouldn't even think of. We don't even do this with our mothers and fathers and our children. I want to be with you every time you exit. I want to be with you every time you enter. This is the love that they had. Now look at Sulaim. فَقَالَتْ لَهُ Sulaim. Sulaim hears a dua. And she says, يَا أَبَا طَلْحَ أو أبو طلحة إني والله لا أجد من ألم المخاض بهذا المولود ما كنت أجده من قبل. Oh Abu Talha, I don't feel the same pain that I used to feel before when I was going into labor. فانطلق بنا, let's go. فانطلق بنا ولا تتأخر عن صحبة رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. Let's not deprive ourselves. Let's not deprive ourselves from the companionship of our Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام. They enter into Medina, Sulaim gives birth. I'm telling you, look at the love that she has. She says she gives birth to that child. And she says, لا يرضعه أحد. Nobody breastfeed this child قبل أن تذهبوا به إلى رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. Before you take this child to be in the companionship of our Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام. The Prophet takes a child and he performs something called tahniq, which is a sunnah. He takes ajwa al-Medina, he takes the dates of Medina known as ajwa, and he puts it in his mouth and he chews it and he makes it soft, and he takes a portion of that ajwa and he puts it in the mouth of this child. عليه أفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم. And he names him Abdullah. And from his progeny 10 great ulama came out. 10 great ulama came out. Ask yourself, brothers and sisters in Islam, what is your heart attached to? What is your heart attached to? Is your heart attached to yourself? Is your heart attached to this dunya? Is your heart attached to your family? Is your heart attached to your children? And it can be. But is it more attached to them than Allah Azza wa Jal? Is it more attached to Allah or is it more attached to them? Ya ikhwatil kiram, who do you love more? What do you love more? This is what this khutbah is all about. Who do we love? What is it that we love? Is it true love that we have? Do you love the time that you spend with your children? When you see them laughing and talking and you're with their suhbah and your companionship? Or do you love to sacrifice a little bit of that so you can come to Isha in the masjid? What do you love more? What do you love more? Do you love to be in the companionship of your spouse? And you love her and she loves you. But would you rather sacrifice that for Isha in the masjid? Ya ikhwa, what do you love more? Do you love that bed, that cozy bed, that warm bed? Or do you love Fajr in the masjid? When it gets cold and freezing? And ask the people, ask Ahl al-Fajr, the people who come for Salat al-Fajr. Wallahi, you get out of the house and by the time you get to the masjid, only then does the car warm up. By the entire time you're shivering, your teeth are chattering, you get to the masjid, your hands are freezing cold when you put it on the steering wheel. But wallahi, ask them and they can tell you, I love Salah in the masjid for Salat al-Fajr more than I love my cozy bed. I love Allah Azza wa Jal. I love the Prophet more than I love myself. That's what love is. And that's what true love of Allah Ta'ala and the love of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam is. What do you love more? Do you love what you are tempted to look at? And every time you exit from your home, you're going to be tempted to look at something that is impermissible for you to look at. Forget about outside the home. You're in your home, on your bed, scrolling through. What do you love more? Do you love looking at what you are tempted to look at? Or do you love Allah Azza wa Jal and the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam? Ask yourself, ya ikhwatil kiram, a khutbah of reflection. Who is it that we love? What is it that we love? Because the ibad of Allah, the chosen ibad of Allah, the selected few, are people who love Allah and they love the Prophet more than they love anything else. وأقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم واستغفروا إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. استغفر الله العظيم الذي لا إله إلا هو إليه. استغفر الله العظيم فتوب إليه. استغفر الله فتوب إليه. الحمد لله على إحسانه والشكر له على توفيقه وامتنانه. وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. عباد الله، يقول ربنا عز وجل: يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله ولتنظر نفس ما قدمت لغد واتقوا الله إن الله خبير بما تعملون. We praise Allah Ta'ala and we thank Allah Azza wa Jal. I bear witness that there is no deity worthy of worship except Allah, and Muhammad is his final messenger. Allah Ta'ala in the Quran, He says, Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu, O you who believe, ittaqullah, fear Allah, وَلْتَنْظُرْ نَفْسٌ مَا قَدَّمَتْ لِغَدٍ, and look at what you are presenting for your Lord tomorrow, meaning يوم القيامة. وَاتَّقُوا fear Allah, إِنَّ اللَّهَ خَبِيرٌ بِمَا تَعْمَلُونَ. Allah Ta'ala is all knowing of what you do. Brothers and sisters in Islam, realize the sign of a heart being attached to Allah Azza wa Jalla and His Prophet is that you are eager to worship Allah. You are eager to worship Allah. You find contentment in the difficulty of their obedience. That obedience of Allah, despite the difficulty, you find contentment, you find solace in it. You always want to be in their service. You desire to please them. You are happy with the will of Allah Azza wa Jal. You yearn to meet them. You find company in their remembrance. كما يقول ابن جزي واعلم أن محبة الله إذا تمكنت من القلب ظهرت آثارها على الجوارح من الجد في الطاعة والنشاط لخدمته والحرص على مرضاته والتلذذ بمناجاته والرضا بقضائه والشوق إلى لقائه والأنس بذكره. Brothers and sisters in Islam, I end with one statement of our Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام, in which he mentions that a person who has these three qualities, they will taste the halawa of faith. A person who possesses these three qualities in them, in their practice, in their actions, they will taste the sweetness of faith. Ya ikhwat al-kiram, pay attention to this hadith. So many of us, including myself, we're deficient. Our a'mal are deficient. We pray as if it's ritualistic. We just get the action done. We don't taste the sweetness. When so many in the ummah, they taste the sweetness of faith. Listen to the words of the Prophet. He said, ثَلَاثٌ مَنْ كُنَّ فِيهِ وَجَدَ حَلَاوَةَ الْإِيمَانِ. A person who has these three in them, they will taste the sweetness of faith. أن يكون الله ورسوله أحب إليه مما سواهما. When Allah Azza wa Jal and the Prophet are more beloved to them than anything and everything else. وأن يحب المرء لا يحبه إلا لله. And a person does not love their brother or their sister for no any reason except for the sake of Allah. Not because they can get a favor from them, not because they're a connection, not because they can use them, but they purely love even the people that you have friction with in the masjid, even the people you have friction with in the community, in your family, you still love them for no other reason but for the sake of Allah Azza wa Jal. The Prophet ﷺ, he goes on to say, وَأَن يَكْرَهَ أَن يَعُودَ فِي الْكُفْرِ بَعْدَ إِذْ أَنْقَذَهُ اللَّهُ مِنْ كَمَا يَكْرَهُ أَن يُلْقِيَ فِي النَّارِ. And the person, he hates to return to kufr, or maybe in the context of many of us, return to a life of sin. And we all know that the life of sin is a life of desire and temptation. And in many ways, it's a way of releasing your desires, and it's enjoyable. But the person who truly tastes the halawa of iman hates that life, and hates that sin, and hates those evil actions, and hates disbelief, and returning to it. Just like that person would hate to be thrown into the fire of Jahannam. We ask Allah Ta'ala to make us from among the people who truly love Allah. We ask Allah Ta'ala to make us from the people that truly love our Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. And it is manifested in our actions. Allahumma ansur al-Islam wal-Muslimin, wa adhill al-shirka wal-mushrikeen, wa dammir a'da'aka a'da' ad-din. Allahumma anji al-mustad'afina min al-muslimina fi Gaza, wa fi Sudan, wa fi Lubnan, wa fi kulli makani ya Rabb al-alamin. اللهم ثبت أقدام المسلمين في سوريا وفي بلاد الشام. اللهم كن معهم ولا تكن عليهم. اللهم يا الله احمي حوزة الإسلام واجمع كلمة المسلمين على الحق يا رب العالمين. عباد الله اذكروا الله يذكركم واشكروه على نعمه يزدكم ولذكر الله تعالى أولى وأجل والله يعلم ما تصنعون. أقيموا الصلاة.